So welcome again, or to those of you that were here 5 minutes ago, welcome again. Nice to see you. I'm really excited about this one because I have, as these guys know, a certain amount of history and passion for what they're going to talk about. So super excited. We're going to get started quite promptly because we're a little bit late with some of the technical switchover. So we'll get going. I want to say welcome to our folks online as well. If we have time for questions at the end, we'll do our best to take those. We may not, so apologies in advance, but I'm sure that you can grab the guys afterwards if you do have follow-up. And with that, I'm going to hand my microphone over here, and I'm going to let them get started. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to the session. How many of you went to the panel on Monday? Show of hands on AuthEN, so about a few of you. We'll cover a little bit of the same ground, but hopefully not be too repetitive, because this is the session where we report out what we learned from the AuthEN 1.1 Interop event that we did yesterday here at Authenticate. Unlike Monday, we don't have enough time for everybody to introduce themselves, so I'm going to go very quickly here. I'm Omri Gazitt, co-founder and CEO of Aserto. Alex Olivier, Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Cerbos. We have Atul, and I can never pronounce your last name, so you're going to have to help me with that.
Tulshibagwale.
CTO of Signal, and we have David Brossard, who is the CTO of Axiomatics. A very august set of people that have collectively, I would say, at least, kind of 50 plus years, 70, 80 plus years in the authorization space. We all are wearing a different hat here at this event, and while we're working on OpenID AuthEN, which is the hat of trying to work together, even as competitors, to create an interoperability standard for authorization. And that's actually a good segue to talk about the difference between authentication and authorization. Most of you, I'm sure, already know, but authentication is making sure that the user is who they say they are. And we have a mature set of technologies for being able to answer that question. We, of course, have OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. The FIDO Alliance, of course, pioneered technologies like WebAuthn and CTAP. And so we largely have mature technology for being able to do authentication in a passwordless way with passkeys. And that's, of course, the 97% of the focus of this conference is about those technologies. What's next is authorization. And that is the answer to the question, what can the user do in the context of this application? So a show of hands, how many of you have actually experienced or touched or heard of any of the technologies on the right side of the slide? We have a few of you, so we have the right audience here for this. But clearly the technologies on the right side have not reached the level of ubiquity as the technology on the left. And that is what we're trying to solve with AuthEN. AuthEN aims to be the OpenID Connect for the authorization space. So with that, I want to hand over to David, who's going to take us briefly through the AuthEN charter.
Should I stand?
Please.
All right, I'll stretch my legs. So very briefly, within AuthEN, we started back in 2022, although in earnest in 2023, so a little over a year ago at Identiverse. And really the goal of AuthEN was to try and define interoperability between the different ways of doing authorization. And so if you look at authorization, there's one major architecture that NIST put out back in 2013. We call it the P*P architecture, PAP, PDP, so on and so forth. This picture kind of summarizes it. The brain is the PDP, the policy decision point. The traffic light is the PAP. And so when looking at this architecture, the very first thing we wanted to do was define an interoperable PEP PDP so that, oh, cool, thanks. My clicker.
I'm your clicker.
Yeah, awesome. Human-sized clicker, so that if you invested in a PDP by any one of the vendors here or an open source PDP, you could swap out very easily. It also means that where we want to go at some point is what we call the OAuth moment of authorization, meaning that off-the-shelf apps would be able to have a PEP built in inside of the off-the-shelf or the SaaS apps, and then their customers, you would be able to configure an Axiomatics, a Signal, an Aserto, a Cerbos, so on and so forth, right? So that was the first part of the charter. Click. The second part to the is really cool voice recognition, by the way. Does it work in French? Click. The second part is event delivery. So there's this acknowledgement that authorization might not just be upfront authorization PEP PDP, but also it needs to be able to consume signals from different parts. So that enters into the realm of the way we do authorization in many apps today is token-based. So if you have a token, it's valid for the lifetime of that token or that session. And so that token could have too much or too little access, and so you need signals to be able to accommodate or adapt those tokens, right? So that's a lot of the work that Atul has been doing in a sibling working group called Risk.
Shared signals.
Oh, shared signals, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. Risk and CAPE are the standards within shared signals. Also OpenID. So that's the second part we're looking at. Click. That's really cool. All right. And then the third part to the AuthEN working group is looking at policy management, right? And I say policy, I'm a policy guy. There's some people in the audience that do other stuff called graph, I think. But overall, think of it as configuration management. And think of the fact that the authorization requirements within the enterprise, be it on the application level or the enterprise level, they tend to come in the form of a plain old English policy. So then, how do you manage those policies? How do you combine them? How do you collaborate across those policies? How do you convert them into your configuration, be it an authorization language or a graph or something else? So we'll work on that too. Then there's one more thing actually that we didn't mention on the slide, and that's design patterns, right? A lot of the work within AuthEN will be figuring out what are the best design patterns to apply authorization efficiently.
Great. Next, I'd like Atul to take us through the payload format and specifically the PEP to PDP API that we built for this Interop event. I want to shout out to Atul who wrote the first draft of the spec, and that's honestly why we have made so much progress in a short year.
Well, I mean, I only sort of kindled the fire. These guys just sort of took it and to where it is right now. So a lot of the work is actually theirs. As you can see, the request response is a very simple thing here. There is a flexibility in sort of how you can express what the authorization decision is about. So that's the subject. This is actually a spec in the IETF called subject identifiers, and we're just sort of leveraging that. And so you have you can express human identities, non-human identities. You can express sort of the same identity in many different ways. Then you have something that describes what is the action that you're trying to take. Whether it's, in this case, you're seeing the application is trying to delete a particular resource, and it's asking the policy decision point whether or not they should be allowed to do that. And then the last thing there is, the description of the resource, and you can describe it in quite a bit of detail. And this is what sort of gives you both the context and the fine-grained nature of the decision, right? So you can describe a resource at individual levels with some context associated with it. And finally, what comes back is very simple. It's just can this access go forward or can it not? And that hopefully will make the life of the application very simple, because all it has to do is send the required information to the PDP, and then back comes a decision within a really short period of time. And they can offload the whole logic about authorization to the PDP in that way.
Yeah, a couple of additional notes. The current state of the spec, I mentioned a few versions here. 1.0 is the first version that we have now in the review period for the OpenID Foundation. We expect it to be voted on in the first 2 weeks of November. So right around the corner, we will actually have a stable implementers draft that people can start building into their products. That's going to be a big milestone. 1.1 is the follow-on spec, and that's the one where we have basically a preview. It's not yet achieved a status of an implementers draft, but it is the one where we added what's called box carring, which is the ability to execute multiple requests in a single round trip. And if hopefully these slides will be all made available, but all of the, let me make sure that I can. Let me get out of this this mode here for a second and put it on
Don't
the
share
browser.
Passwords.
I'm sorry?
You're extending your screen, so it's showing you the screen.
Okay, all right, I see. That's too bad. We will have to, when we do the demo, we'll have to somehow switch to the other screen. Otherwise, we won't be able to do a demo. But,
yeah, you need to go to screen,
oh, okay.
Switch into
All
duplicate.
right. Let's see. So systems settings. Go screen. Displays. Sorry. Oh, wow. On stage, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Atul will help. I helped you yesterday with the interop.
I will try to help.
Oh, here we go. Thank you so much. So this is what the current draft of the spec looks like. It's hyperlinked from the presentation. It's also hyperlinked from the AuthEN working group site in the OpenID Foundation. We'll have a QR code for that in a second. But let me actually go back to this slide mode here and have Alex introduce the to-do scenario and then show you a demo of what that looks like.
Yeah, so one of the early decisions in terms of how to make things kind of very tangible and real rather than just looking at walls of specification text was let's go and build a demo scenario. So all with sort of computer science backgrounds, the first thing you obviously build is a to-do application. And so that's exactly what we have. It represents, I would say, a fairly common pattern, at least we as vendors will see from our users around how people are going to implement authorization. So our to-do application is based around Rick and Morty, the cartoon, which I've still not watched, even though I've worked on this demo for like a year and a half now. But essentially we have subjects. They either are a viewer, an editor, or an evil genius, in the case of Rick, or an admin. They're interacting with to-dos, so that's your resources inside of the application, and then the different actions. So view, create, complete, delete, your fairly typical to-do application kind of actions. In terms of the architecture, it's a React front-end website. It's then calling a back-end service. This is a Node.js back-end. It uses a little database to store the actual to-dos in. And then for the actual authorization checks, it's calling out to an authorization service, a PDP of some sorts. And that interface, that connection that it's talking over to the PDP is using the AuthEN specification for that, which means we're in this model now where everyone that's contributed or has launched an instance of their company's policy decision point or one of the open source policy decision points, we can actually go and talk to those different PDPs within the same application, within the same environment. You can see how committed we are to open standards. I have like access to my competitor's laptop. It's great. So I'm logged in currently as Morty. It's a to-do application, and we can see list of my to-dos. We can see who owns them. Some of them I can tick as done, or others I can't because of my access. So currently as Morty, I can go and create to-dos as myself. I can go and complete a to-do. And here I'm interacting with resources and the policy behind it that says I should be able to do this. And these little drop-downs below allow us to actually go and pick a different authorization PDP behind the scenes. So if we swap to the Cerbos one, I can still go and do these actions, and they complete. And here we've sort of, in the context of the application, completely swapped out what authorization service we're using behind the scenes, and the application still works. If I go and log out and go and log in as Rick.
Rick is the evil genius. He can do everything.
Yeah, so here in our policy, we have a definition of role evil genius, and now I can actually go and do actions based upon users that I necessarily shouldn't have access to. So here, the policies allow that action to happen. And this is using the 1.1 version of the spec, which Omri mentioned, so boxcarring. When we're displaying these list of to-dos, which ones you can and cannot untick is actually based on a boxcar request. So the application layer is sending over to one of the selected PDPs, saying which one of these can this user particularly go and update, in this case, complete. And then it's using that to then render the decision back. And again, we can keep swapping to different backends of all the supported ones to basically swap out which PDP we're using. And then that's all done over the standard interface from the specification. And with that, back to you.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, usually interop demos are like watching the paint dry on the walls. You know, you're running through a bunch of assertions, so we try to make it a little bit more whimsical and create an actual application here. So back to the slides. Let's see if I can get these back up. Yes,
Success.
Excellent. Success. Now let's have David take us through the list of interoperable implementations.
Yes, what's cool is that we started the work about a year ago, and very quickly we got a lot of traction with the different authorization vendors in the game, and little by June of this year we had I think it was 12 or 14 implementations that did the 1.0 preview.
13.
13? If you do the average of 12 and 14, 13. Clicker and mathematician. And what was also cool, what I want to call out, so in the list, at least back in June, we had 12 policy-based products and 1 graph-based product, Alex here in the audience, but it doesn't really matter to you, the application being protected. That's what's cool. So how authorization is done is now decoupled from what you're protecting, which is really nice. The other thing I want to call out in the different implementations we have is that some of them use the same backend technology, Open Policy Agent on the one hand, Zachwell and Alpha on the other. So when Aserto, for instance, when Omri did the work for Aserto and Topaz, you ended up being able to reuse a lot of that work, if not all of the work, for Open Policy Agent for other OPA-based companies like Styra. Similarly, when I did the work for Zachwell and Alpha, I got for free the Talus implementation because they're Zachwell-based as well, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. One thing I'll add here is, as David said, there are quite a diversity of implementations behind the spec. They all have different characteristics. They all do different things. I would say that the current scenario kind of, if anything, is a little bit more of an ABAC scenario, an attribute-based access control scenario, than a relationship-based access control scenario. In the next version of the To-Do app, we plan on changing that a little bit so that we have additional implementations that will come online. OpenFGA is working on one from Auth0. I know that AuthZ and SpiceDB are working on one as well. So on this list, you're actually seeing a pretty wide berth of all the authorization vendors out there that are participating. So I would say we're now past the 50% mark, and quickly going to get to 70–80% of authorization vendors actually supporting the spec. Lessons learned. So, here are a few things that we've learned, from this short year that we've been working on this interoperable specification for authorization. The first thing, like I said before, is starting with something as opposed to approaching it from a blank sheet of paper really, really helps. And again, Atul wrote a good first draft. 80% of what was in there is, in the current draft, and of course it takes another 6 months to a year to get through all the different kinks and things like that. But I don't think that we would be where we are today without having a solid first draft. We did a survey of prior art, so Xactwell has a lot of lessons learned that we didn't want to, we wanted to take all the best of Xactwell and leave all the mistakes behind. Angle brackets.
Love XML.
Sorry, I had to do that. We went through a process of cataloging use cases, and Alex over here led that for us, and that was very helpful to agree on what are the things that we actually want to accomplish with an interoperability spec. Defining a scenario early was quite helpful, so we defined the to-do scenario, and that helped shape what it was that we needed to accomplish. It also helped feed things back into the spec itself, so we learned quite a bit by actually implementing a real scenario. And last but not least, having forcing functions really helps you go faster. So we set a pretty aggressive first interop deadline of Identiverse 2024. That was in May or June, I forget. I think it was late May, exactly. And we were able to get a lot of vendors to participate in that. And likewise, this event was a great forcing function for the 1.1 interop. Closing here, let's have Atul talk about what's next.
Sure. So just a couple of things we are adding to the spec now. One is the resource search and the subject search. With 1.1, we are getting the batch request, what we're referring to as the box scoring. But what we're going further and saying, okay, you can ask the question like, given a user, what resources do they have access to? And the flip side of that, given a resource, which users have access to that resource? So you can make these kinds of queries in the future versions. And we're working on related, like Omri talked about the reback-based interop scenarios and additional interop scenarios that will demonstrate these new functions.
I lied. We have 2 more slides. Call to action.
Yeah,
David?
so call to action, the fact that we did all the authorization implementations with the authorization vendors is all fine and well, but if there's no one consuming the API, what's the point, right? So call to arms, we want to reach out to all the IDPs here at Authenticate and beyond and tell them, hey guys, within your authentication flows or your token issuance or validation flows, build in a hook to call out to an AuthZen compliant PDP so you can do fine-grained authorization. Jonas is going to be on stage next. He's been doing some of that work. He's from Curity, so that's not what you're going to be talking about, but if you want to find him offline, you can. And then the second category of products that we want to reach out to is API gateways and proxies, because it's a very low-hanging fruit. It makes sense for API gateways to do that call out. As a matter of fact, one gateway that I've worked with, Zuplo, has done replicated the work with Cerbos and Aserto. Had we had AuthZen ready then, they could have just plugged in AuthZen and killed all these authorization vendors with just one stone.
Hopefully not kill us, but
no, kill the bird. And then lastly, we want to reach out that like the Grail is going to be reaching out to companies that build products, the Salesforces, the Workdays, the Dropboxes, and the companies we haven't heard of yet that need authorization and should not be reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, so importantly here, this is your opportunity to lean on your SaaS providers, the Workdays of the world, the Salesforce.coms of the world, and say, hey, it would be great if you could plug into the standard so that we can do policy-based authorization across all these applications. And that's it. This is a QR code that will take you to a link tree for all the things AuthZen. Much
Fantastic.
appreciated.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. And by extension, thank you to everyone that's been involved in all the interop work and all the spec work. There's a lot more people behind here. And this work is incredibly important. And I know I'm biased, but it really is incredibly important. So thank you for coming and listening. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for talking to us. If you have any questions, feel free to either put them in the app. We'll try and get them through the guys or grab the guys afterwards. We're going to wrap. We'll take a couple of minutes, and then we'll be on with our last presentation for the morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.